It took a while to reach this agreement yesterday. Do you think it's likely to hold?
Well, it'll hold for the period of time, I hope, because hostages are something that are very important in the Israeli psyche. In the past, they've given up hundreds of Palestinian prisoners for one hostage. The Hamas have now got 240 odd hostages, and we've got this deal to release 50 of them. Whether it then continues on after the 50 are released, that's very difficult to say at this stage.
Yeah, and it did take a lot to reach this point, and one of them is a major military concession, if we can call it that, which is Israel saying that they're not going to operate the surveillance. They're going to have these daily pauses to allow this to happen. Talk to us about what that means operationally.
Well, operationally, it's quite difficult, and this is where Israel's had to make a really careful, balanced decision. Whenever you stop a military operation, if you're making progress, you lose momentum. And then to restart that military operation again takes an awful lot of effort to get that momentum back. That effort, unfortunately, will translate into more casualties on the ground. And as we've seen Hamas using the civilian population as human shields, it could potentially result in more civilian casualties and almost certainly more casualties on the Israeli military side. But they've had to balance that off with the getting the hostages out, which is very important, for the lives of the hostages, but also politically for the Israeli government, because that has been put as their top priority. This is an agreement that is bounded in time and bounded in a number of hostages. I haven't seen anything on the table that would suggest it's going to be a longer term agreement, and therefore it's unlikely, unless something appears, that would turn into a longer term ceasefire.
What we were hearing for the last few weeks, when Netanyahu said there was no way there were going to be negotiations and there was going to be no way there was going to be any kind of ceasefire or truce, was that the hostages were going to be somehow extricated by the military. Is that plan, did it just not work?
Well, that is extremely difficult, and you're likely to lose more people than you're going to save. It's very, very difficult militarily, A, to identify where the hostages are, B, to be able to get in and extricate them safely, especially if they're in some of these underground tunnels. There are hundreds of kilometers of underground tunnels underneath a relatively small area in Gaza. And if the hostages are held in there, trying to get a military operation in to get them out is, I won't even say virtually impossible, it is impossible. So you wouldn't be able to do that. Negotiation is the only real way of getting them out. And I'm surprised that they've managed to get to a point where they can negotiate to get them out. It shows that Hamas is really quite worried about the position that they're in militarily.
Yeah, and that does chime obviously with what the Israeli government is saying, but also journalistic sources on the ground we've been speaking to saying that, Hamas really has obviously felt the bombing and felt the destruction. So they have got to that point. Look, you mentioned already that this is unlikely, obviously, to be the end of the war. Netanyahu saying the same thing. They're going to continue to what they call eliminate Hamas, or try to. I mean, how much longer, if they manage to rescue some of the hostages, hopefully all of them, but how much longer could you see the conflict going on for?
Well, the conflict in Gaza and clearing Gaza could take another few months. If it expands into a regional conflict, how long's a piece of string? That's the real difficulty. Hamas is still on a nightly basis rocketing Israel. We don't hear that reported much. Hamas, all the Hamas leaders have said, in recent days, that their stated aim is still the destruction of the state of Israel and the killing of every Jew. They haven't changed that. That doesn't give a very strong negotiating point for a longer term settlement. And unless there's a longer term settlement on the table, then we're not going to see an end to the military aspect of this conflict.